Notre Dame fans, welcome to this special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. This is a bit of an insider edition. I want to talk a little bit about what I'm hearing about the Notre Dame defense under Marcus Freeman. It's very early. I expect things to continue to change and maneuver, but there are some things that seem to be coming into light, and I want to share those and talk a little bit about the hiring of Chris O'Leary as the new safeties coach. To begin, we started to kind of see a little bit of insight into what Notre Dame is going to be doing on defense, at least sort of from a big picture standpoint at last Tuesday's press conference. Defensive line coach Mike Elston talked about the difference between the big end and the Viper end, which doesn't necessarily mean 4 down versus 3 down, because those things will still be true even in a 3 down look. But we started to hear some things about kind of the terminology is going to remain the same, which I think was a really smart decision by Marcus Freeman. I think that's what good coaches do. He's going to have his philosophy and his play calls, but he's going to try to marry up the terminology as much as he can so that things remain the same for the Notre Dame players, because it's easier for him to learn new things than it is for, obviously 40-plus players that are going to be on defense. So I thought he said all the right things, struck all the right chords. I elaborated on that a lot in an article I wrote at irishbreakdown.com. You can check that out. But here's some things that I'm hearing behind the scenes that go a little bit deeper into what they're going to do. So from what I'm told, Notre Dame's base defense, so the first thing that they're going to install is going to be a 4-down defense. And maybe install isn't the correct word, but it's going to be kind of what they base things out of in most weeks. It's going to be a 4-down defense. It's going to be a 4-2-5 look. I think it's going to be a traditional 4-2-5. From what I understand, it's going to be a diverse 4-2-5 as well, meaning that they could easily be in a 3 linebacker alignment with a traditional rover. We could also see a lot of scenarios like he did at Cincinnati, where that 5th defender is going to be a safety or a bigger corner body. So I think we're going to see a lot more flexibility, and that's really what I'm hearing a lot of, is that even though the 4-2-5 might be the base, it's not going to look like it did under the previous 2 coaches and really the previous 4 coaches. One thing that a lot of Brian Kelly's coordinators have been, and it was a nature of just where college football was for most of that time, was this is your defense and you kind of stay in it. So Bob Diaco in his 3-4, Brian Van Gordon in his 4-3, and then the last 4 seasons with the 4-2-5. And you didn't really see a lot of changes until you got to 3rd down situations or nickel situations. They were going to be in their 4-2-5 more often than not. What I'm hearing about Marcus Freeman, and again, this is an adaptation that he's had in recent seasons, kind of going along with the changes that are happening in college football on offense, which is you can't just be locked into your base defense in 1st and 2nd down. So what I'm hearing is that we're going to see a lot more flexibility from Notre Dame in their base defense throughout the season, which means there could be series where they're in a 4-2-5 personnel. There could be series where they're in their 4-2-5 personnel with a 4-man. They could be in that personnel in a 3-man. We could see a 4-2-5, as I mentioned earlier, with a true 5th defensive back, a 3rd linebacker. We're going to see more 3-man stuff, not just in nickel, but in base defenses. And I think that we could see, well, I'm hearing from talking to different people that what we saw at Cincinnati is going to continue, which is there are going to be weeks where they're going to be almost exclusively in a 3-down defense. And this is one of the things that excites me about Marcus Freeman, not so much that it's going to be 3 down versus 4 down, because I don't really have a preference on that. I thought his comments about taking the strengths of his team and fitting the defense around that were spot on. So I expect him to adapt year to year based on what he believes the strengths of the team is on defense. If he feels really good about his defensive line personnel, which I think that there's a lot of confidence in that, then you're going to see more 4 down. But at the same time, not being married to that, to where, look, against this particular team, we need to get a big guy off the field and we got to put another athlete on the field. And so I like hearing that. I think we're going to see more of that. I think you're not going to recognize this defense as much week to week. It's going to be changes, but it's the philosophy is going to stay the same, but it's just about matching up personnel to be able to really go after and attack just the variety of defenses that your offenses that you're going to see. One of the unique challenges of being at Notre Dame is when Marcus Freeman was at Cincinnati, A lot of the teams in that league were the up-tempo spread teams, so that's why they switched to the 3-3-5. It really fit all the best teams in that league. You needed to run that against Central Florida, against Memphis, against Houston, against Tulsa, against a lot of the best teams in that league. At Notre Dame, however, it's going to be a much more diverse schedule. If you look at the 2021 schedule, for example, which is Marcus Freeman's first at Notre Dame, he's going to play 2 Big Ten teams that are going to look a lot different. You have sort of the pro-style passing offense from Purdue. You're going to have the ground and pound pro-style run offense from Wisconsin. You're going to face USC and their air raid. You're going to face North Carolina and their version of the air raid. USC's air raid is very pass-heavy. North Carolina's air raid likes to run the ball a lot more. Obviously, last year they had 2,000-yard running back. So even though both are air raid offenses, they're very different. You have to attack them differently. So you're going to see playing Navy in the triple option. So it's a very diverse schedule, and that requires a philosophy of diversity, of being multiple. And you can't just do that the week before the game. You need a 3-down look or a different personnel. So I think we're going to see a lot of that from the very beginning. And part of that is it's going to be matchup based, as I said. Now, one thing that we've kind of hinted about that I'm hearing is all but a sure thing is the decision to give Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa, who's been a starter the last 2 years at defensive tackle, an opportunity to work at defensive end, the big end that Mike Elson talked about on signing day. I think it fits his body type well. He is not a natural 290-plus pound guy. I think this will allow him to stay at a more manageable weight, which will allow him to maintain more quickness and explosiveness athletically. It'll fit his body better. I think he'll slide into the Adi Ogundeji role. I don't know if he'll be the pass rusher Ogundeji was, but I think from a run defense standpoint, they really like what he can bring to the table. Plus, as the big end, it's very natural for him to kind of slide inside as a 3 technique when they go to some of the 3-down looks. If they want to go with 3-3 personnel, but they'll still maintain the ability to go to a 4-down, he can easily slide inside much easier than Justin Ademilola, who I expect to be a big part of that rotation at strong side end, who's not quite the bigger body that Tagovailoa-Amosa is. So I think those 2 players at strong side end, Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa and Justin Ademilola, is going to give Notre Dame some diversity at that big end position, which is what they're looking for. Part of the thing that I'm hearing that this decision is made is number one, because they think Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa can thrive in that role. But there's also a lot of confidence in some of the younger players that are emerging. Jason Ademilola, for example, Riley Mills, and Gabriel Rubio are 3 players that are going to get an opportunity to step into that role and form a strong rotation. So there's a lot of confidence that it's going to happen. And from what I'm hearing also in Marcus Freeman's defense, he wants his interior players, especially his 3 technique, to be more playmakers, where in the past couple seasons, the interior players were more disruptors, take up space, whether it's by penetration or taking on blocks, which then allows the linebackers to kind of run free. Obviously, this is a linebacker-oriented defense as well, but from what I understand, Marcus Freeman wants the defensive linemen to make more plays on the ball, and this allows Notre Dame to get Myron Tagovailoa on the edge in a position they think he can be more disruptive, and it allows them to have players like Jason Ademilola, Riley Mills, Gabriel Rubio, who they think are better playmakers at the 3 technique than what we've seen from Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa in recent seasons, who did a lot of good things, but he didn't make a lot of plays on the ball. They think he'll thrive more outside. So that's really where that's coming from. Another little tidbit, and this isn't going to surprise a lot of people that listen to our channel or listen to our podcast, is there's a lot of confidence in Isaiah Foskey, not just stepping into a starting role. That's all but a given. But there's a lot of confidence. He's going to have a huge breakout season this year. And a lot of the decisions that are being made are kind of being built around the thought that they're going to have that really outstanding Viper position with him. And then, of course, Jordan Botelho as part of rotation. So that's another aspect of why they're sort of building around it. And it fits what we're hearing about Marcus Freeman and his philosophy, which is, I'm going to take the best players and we're going to say, okay, how do we accent their strengths? And he talked a lot about that in his opening press conference. He also is something that we saw on film at Cincinnati. Chris O'Leary was promoted to safeties coach. Chris O'Leary has been part of the Notre Dame program for 3 years. He has been a defensive analyst at times. He's been a graduate assistant at times. He's worked with the Rovers this past season. He's worked with the safeties. It was a surprise to me that he was the guy that was promoted to the job when you consider that there was a very qualified and strong candidate on campus in Kerry Cooks, who's far more experienced. So I was a little surprised. So I did a little bit of digging on this. Not that I had a negative feeling about Chris O'Leary. I don't know Chris O'Leary personally. I'm not familiar with his coaching style. So I went into this with an open mind. But I have to say my initial thought was one of surprise. So here's a few things that I've learned about Chris O'Leary, and it's making me kind of excited to see what he's, his coaching style this spring. Number one, this decision was obviously Brian Kelly's. Brian Kelly's the head coach, is going to ultimately make them decision. But some things I've heard about how the process went, I like the way that Brian Kelly went about it. Number one, obviously Marcus Freeman was heavily involved in the process. My understanding, talking to sources, is that if Marcus Freeman doesn't sign off on this, I don't know if this move is going to be made, which tells me that Chris O'Leary made a very strong early impression on Marcus Freeman. And the other aspect of it, I was told, is Brian Kelly sought out counsel from players. Guys who've had interactions with some of the graduate assistants, and that it was a tougher decision than you'd think, because the players respect a lot of the coaches, the analysts, the GAs on the staff, and then of course there was outside interest in the position. But my understanding is that when Kelly would talk with the players about Chris O'Leary, the reviews were just too strong to pass up. The thought is that Chris O'Leary is a young star. I've talked to people that know him much better than I do. That's the thought. Bright coach, hard worker, really smart, relates well to players. Now, the last part is the interesting part, because relating well to players could mean there's a good way and a bad way. The bad way is simply that as a young person, you like the same music, you like the same movies, you talk the same language, and you can relate to them sort of as a friend. That may be good for a graduate assistant or some other things where maybe it's more of a off the field role. But as a coach, you don't necessarily want that to be the driving force behind the players liking you. My understanding is that all those things are true of Chris O'Leary. The reason that what his recommendation from players stood out is that it wasn't about that friendship type of thing. It was the commanding of respect that he got from the players for his ability to teach and his knowledge of the game. That is important, because if the players respect you or like you because you have interest that they share, that's not going to necessarily make you an effective coach. You have to be able to command respect in the room, that when it's time to get to work, it's, yes, coach, we got you. Let's we're willing to learn. We're going to trust you that you're going to do right by us to put us in position to be successful. My understanding is that is really what shined through to Brian Kelly in his interactions with the Notre Dame players, that there's a great deal of respect for what Chris O'Leary does as a football coach, the track record that he's established in a very short period of time, working with players, and including Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah this past season. So I think that was ultimately what can allow you to get past the lack of a great resume. He was a Florida Tech safeties coach the year before he came to Notre Dame. He spent 2 years as a graduate assistant at Georgia State before before that he was a player at Indiana State as a wide receiver. It's not the ideal resume you look for at a place like Notre Dame, but from what I understand is that aspect of his knowledge, his work ethic, his ability to relate to players in a way that doesn't make him seem like one of the guys, commanding respect, knowledge, teaching ability, all those things were just outstanding. And even though his youth and his resume isn't impressive, those things are outstanding. And that's why I've been told by sources that this is a up-and-coming star coach in the making. And that's why Brian Kelly made the hire that he did. I was concerned that it was just an easy promotion, guy on campus. It don't have to put a lot of work, but my understanding is, after talking to different sources, that went away. That wasn't a concern. It sounds like this is a young star in the making that Marcus Freeman and all the players on the roster were in full support of. So that's what I've gathered about that. Made me feel a lot better about his hiring. And it makes me excited to see what he's going to do when we get out there. Hopefully we can see some in the spring, but definitely when we get out in the fall to see the work, because it's going to be very important. The job he was hired to do is very important. The safety position in this defense is important. There's often going to be three safeties on the field together. And, of course, he's going to have an All-American to work with, Kyle Hamilton. But getting that second safety and that third safety position rolling is going to be very, very important. So there's going to be a lot of expectations and pressure on Chris O'Leary to get the job done. The people I talk to think he's going to do it, and they're very confident that the safety position is going to be a strength for Notre Dame next year. So that's going to do it for this episode of sort of our Irish Breakdown Insider podcast. Hope to have more of this as the spring goes on and we hear and learn more things about what's going on behind the scenes at the Notre Dame program. But we'll be back with you later today. We're going to talk a little bit about Notre Dame recruiting this week. We're going to have a lot of videos and articles at irishbreakdown.com and podcasts, Irish Breakdown Podcast, talking about Notre Dame recruiting. We're going to have some talking about the offense and Tommy Rees and the role he needs to have in the offense. So make sure you are subscribed to our channel. Help us get to the 1,000 mark. We're getting closer and closer. We've gotten there way closer, faster than we thought we did, but we need your help. Subscribe to that. Leave comments in the comment section. If you have questions, if you have follow-up, if there's a topic you'd like us to discuss, please share that in the comment section, and we'll definitely look at it and add it to our to-do list. Make sure you're staying locked into irishbreakdown.com, and of course, subscribe to our podcast with whatever host that you use. So have a good day. We'll be back with you again very soon.